The community center's art room buzzed with gentle concentration as Violet Harper moved between easels, her paint-stained apron swaying with each step. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating canvases in various stages of completion and the focused faces of her students. At 28, Violet had found her calling in teaching art to people of all ages. From eager children to seniors discovering creativity for the first time. Remember, there's no such thing as a mistake in watercolor, she told Mrs. Patterson, who was frowning at her landscape painting. Sometimes the paint bleeds in ways we don't expect, but that's where magic happens. Violet's own easel stood in the corner, holding her current masterpiece, a watercolor portrait of her mother, captured in a moment of pure joy from a photograph, taken just months before cancer claimed her life 2 years ago. The painting had consumed Violet's evenings for the past 4 months, each brushstroke a meditation on memory and love. Hey, you're staying late again tonight? Nathan Reed appeared in the doorway, his law books tucked under one arm and concern written across his angular features. His sandy hair was perfectly styled despite the long day at the university, and his button-down shirt remained crisp even after hours in the library. Just finishing up, Violet replied, wiping her hands on a cloth. Grace wants to see the portrait tomorrow. If she likes it, it might be the centerpiece for my solo exhibition next month. Nathan's smile was supportive but strained. They had been together for 3 years, meeting during her brief attempt at art history graduate school, before she realized her heart belonged in creating and not analyzing. He understood her passion intellectually, but she sometimes wondered if he truly felt it. Don't forget, we have dinner with my parents this weekend, he reminded her. And maybe we could look at those apartment listings I mentioned. The place near the university has great light for your studio. Violet nodded absently, her attention already drifting back to the painting. Her mother's eyes seemed to follow her as she moved around the room, encouraging and warm just as they had been. In life, those eyes had watched Violet take her first art class at age 5, had celebrated every school art show, and had whispered encouragement during the dark months of treatment when painting became Violet's only escape from the sterile hospital. Walls, after Nathan left and her students packed up their supplies, Violet remained in the quiet art room. She carefully lifted her mother's portrait from the easel, studying it in the golden hour light. The watercolors had achieved something she had never quite captured before, not just her mother's physical features, but her essence, her spirit. The way she could light up a room with nothing but genuine interest in whoever was speaking. The painting was scheduled to travel to Grace Whitman's gallery the next morning for final evaluation. Grace, now in her 70s, had been running the most respected gallery in their small college town for over 30 years. She had taken Violet under her wing after seeing her work at a local art fair, offering guidance and, more importantly, the possibility of a solo exhibition for an unknown artist. Violet wrapped the portrait carefully in protective cloth and placed it in her portfolio case. The evening air carried the scent of approaching rain as she walked to her small apartment above the bakery on Main Street. She had lived there since college, charmed by the way flower dust caught the morning light. The sounds of the town waking up drifted through her windows. The storm arrived just after midnight, announced by a flash of lightning that turned Violet's apartment white for an instant. She woke to the sound of rain drumming against her windows with unusual force, accompanied by wind that made the old building creak and sway. Weather in their valley could be unpredictable. This felt different, urgent, and almost angry. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind the fresh, washed scent of cleaned earth and the soft drip of water from every surface. Violet made her coffee and toast humming as she prepared for what could be the most important day of her artistic career. Grace had scheduled their appointment for 10 o'clock, allowing plenty of time to discuss the exhibition details. It wasn't until Violet reached for her portfolio case that she noticed the dark stains spreading across the hardwood floor near her bedroom window. The old building's roof had finally surrendered to the storm's assault, allowing rain to pour directly onto the spot where she had left her art supplies. Her hands shook as she unzipped the portfolio case, already knowing what she would find. The protective cloth was soaked through, and beneath it, her mother's portrait had become an unrecognizable blur of running colors. For months of careful work, dissolved in a single night. The paper was so saturated that touching it caused pieces to disintegrate. Taking her mother's carefully rendered smile with them, Violet sank to her knees on the wet floor, cradling the wet, ruined painting like an injured bird. The watercolors that had once captured her mother's vibrant spirit now ran together in muddy streams, erasing not just the artwork, but what felt like her last tangible connection to the woman who had believed. In her dreams, even when no one else did, her phone buzzed with a text from Grace, confirming their appointment. Violet stared at the message through tears, unable to imagine walking into that gallery empty-handed. The exhibition had been planned around this single piece, her breakthrough work. The painting that was supposed to announce her arrival as a serious artist. Nathan found her there an hour later, still kneeling beside the destroyed portrait. He had come by with coffee and bagels, a gesture of support that now felt impossibly distant from her reality. "Oh, Violet," he said, taking in the scene, "I'm so sorry. But you're incredibly talented. You can paint another one, maybe even better than this one." His words, meant to comfort, instead felt like stones thrown into still water. How could she explain that this wasn't just about technical skill or artistic achievement? The portrait had been painted during her rawest period of grief, when her mother's memory was so fresh that Violet could almost feel her presence guiding each brushstroke. That connection, that moment in time, could never be recreated. "It's not just about painting another one," Violet said quietly, her voice barely audible above the continued dripping from the damaged ceiling. This was painted with her memory. Still alive in my hands, I can't go back to that place, that grief, that rawness. It's gone. Nathan knelt beside her, his practical mind already working on solutions. "What if we get it professionally restored? There are people who specialize in damaged artwork." But even as he spoke, they both could see that the damage was too severe. The paper was disintegrating, the pigments completely mixed beyond recognition. Her mother's face, so lovingly rendered over months of evening work, had vanished as completely. As if it had never existed, the community center felt different when Violet arrived for her afternoon classes. Her students noticed her subdued energy, the way her usual enthusiasm had dimmed to something closer to mere competence. She guided them through their exercises, offered encouragement and technique tips. But her heart remained in that water-stained apartment. Mourning, not just a painting, but the loss of what it had represented. As evening approached and her students departed, Violet stood alone in the art room where she had spent so many hopeful hours. The empty easel in the corner seemed to mock her dreams, and she found herself wondering if this was a sign that she wasn't meant to be more than a teacher, that her artistic ambitions had been nothing more than wishful thinking. The rain began. Again as she walked home, gentler this time, but somehow more persistent, as if the sky was determined to wash away every trace of what she had lost. The Restoration District occupied 3 blocks of converted warehouses near the university, where craftspeople worked to preserve everything from century-old furniture to damaged manuscripts. Violet had spent the past week visiting every restoration studio she could find, carrying the remains of her mother's portrait in a protective box, hoping against hope that someone might see possibility where she saw only ruin. Most specialists had been kind but honest about the impossibility of her request. Watercolor, they explained, was particularly vulnerable to water damage. Once the pigments had run and the paper had deteriorated to that extent, there was simply nothing left to work with. But Grace Whitman had given her one more name to try. River Castellanos, who ran a small studio specializing in what he called impossible recoveries. The morning sun cast long shadows between the warehouse buildings as Violet found the address. Grace had written on a scrap of gallery letterhead. The studio occupied the ground floor of a red brick building, its large windows revealing glimpses of easels and work tables within. A simple wooden sign read Castellanos Art Restoration in elegant script. The bell above the door chimed softly as Violet entered, and she was immediately struck by the organized chaos of the space. Paintings in various stages of restoration lined the walls, some missing sections of canvas, others faded beyond recognition. But clearly receiving careful attention, as the air smelled of linseed oil, varnish, and something else, something that reminded her of her mother's art supplies. "You must be Violet," a warm voice said from behind a large easel. Grace called ahead and told me about your situation. River Castellanos emerged from behind his work, and Violet was surprised by his youth. She had expected someone older, more traditionally academic. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with dark hair that suggested he ran his fingers through it while concentrating, and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. His hands were stained with the telltale marks of someone who worked with pigments daily, and his simple white shirt bore evidence of his current project. "I brought what's left," Violet said, her voice smaller than she intended, "though I'm not sure there's anything you can actually do." River gestured to a clean work table near the windows, where natural light would provide the best illumination. Violet carefully opened her protective box, revealing the water-damaged remains of her portrait. The paper had dried into warped, fragile sheets, and the once vibrant watercolors had become muddy stains, with only occasional hints of their original beauty. River studied the damage for several minutes, his expression thoughtful rather than discouraging. He moved around the table, examining the remains from different angles, occasionally lifting a corner of paper with gentle fingers. "Tell me about the original," he said finally. "Not just what it looked like, but how you felt while painting it." "What was your process?" The request surprised Violet, but something in River's tone encouraged honesty. She found herself describing not just the technical aspects of the watercolor, the specific pigments she had used, the number of layers, the techniques for capturing light in her mother's eyes, but also the emotional journey of creating it. She spoke about painting late into the night, feeling her mother's presence in the studio, the way certain colors seemed to choose themselves. "You painted it during your grief period," River observed, not as a question but as understanding. "There's an energy and work created during intense emotion that can't be replicated through technique alone." Violet nodded, surprised by his insight. "That's exactly what I tried to explain to my boyfriend. He thinks I can just paint another one, but it won't be the same. I can't go back to that moment in time." River was quiet for a moment, still studying the damaged portrait. "What if I told you that sometimes we're not meant to go back? What if the goal isn't to recreate what was lost, but to discover what comes next?" Over the following days, Violet found herself returning to River's studio. Initially, she came to check on his progress with her portrait. But gradually, she realized she was drawn by something deeper, the way he approached restoration, not as mere repair work, but as a collaboration between past and present artist, an artisan. River showed her techniques she had never encountered in art school. He demonstrated how X-rays could reveal hidden layers in paintings, how chemical analysis could identify original pigments, how sometimes the most beautiful discoveries came from embracing damage rather than erasing it. "Look at this," he said, one afternoon, showing her a Renaissance painting he was working on. A water stain had created an unexpected pattern across one corner, and rather than removing it entirely, River was incorporating it into the restoration. The stain has become part of the painting's history. Sometimes, what we think of as damage is actually transformation. Nathan visited the studio once, clearly uncomfortable with the amount of time Violet was spending there. He surveyed the space, with the critical eye of someone who saw only inefficiency and impracticality. "This seems like an expensive way to avoid accepting that the painting is gone," he said to Violet as they walked back to her apartment. "Wouldn't it be more productive to focus on new work? You have other paintings that could anchor the exhibition?" Violet realized that productivity wasn't the point. In River's studio, she was learning something that went beyond technique or efficiency. She was discovering that creation and restoration were part of the same process, that honoring what was lost could coexist with embracing what was possible. River had been honest from the beginning. Her mother's portrait couldn't be restored to its original state. The paper was too damaged, the pigments too mixed to separate. But as they worked together, examining every fragment under magnification, documenting the colors that remained, something unexpected began to emerge. "I have an idea," River said. One evening, as they sat surrounded by color samples and historical pigment charts, "What if we don't try to recreate the exact painting? What if we use what we've learned about your original techniques and pigments to create something new, something that honors your mother's memory while acknowledging your growth as an artist?" The suggestion terrified and thrilled Violet in equal measure. It meant letting go of her attachment to the specific image she had lost while embracing the possibility of something she couldn't yet imagine. As autumn deepened and her exhibition date approached, Violet found herself spending most evenings in River's studio. They worked side by side, she on her new paintings and he on his restoration projects. Sharing the comfortable silence of people who understood each other's creative processes, Nathan's visits became less frequent. And when he did come by, the distance between them felt as palpable as the chemistry Violet felt with River. One evening, Nathan arrived to find them both pain-stained and laughing over a shared discovery about color theory. "I can see what's happening here," Nathan said quietly, pulling Violet aside. "I think we both know this isn't working anymore." His words were said with sadness rather than anger, and Violet realized he was right. Somewhere between losing her mother's portrait and finding River's studio, she had also lost the version of herself that had been content with Nathan's practical love. "I'm sorry," she whispered, meaning it completely. "Don't be," Nathan replied. "You're becoming who you're supposed to be. I just don't think I'm meant to be part of that journey." After Nathan left, Violet remained in the studio with River, both of them acknowledging the shift that had occurred without needing to name it immediately. The air between them hummed with possibility, with the recognition that they had found in each other not just it's a partnership, but something deeper and more transformative. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the restoration district, in pristine snow that transformed the utilitarian warehouses into something magical. Violet's exhibition was now just 2 weeks away, and Grace Whitman's gallery buzzed with preparation. The show had evolved far beyond what anyone had originally imagined. Instead of a single centerpiece portrait, Violet's exhibition would feature 12 new works created in collaboration with River paintings that explored themes of loss, restoration, and renewal. Each piece incorporated techniques she had learned in his studio, and several included elements of her original damaged portrait transformed into something entirely new. "I never expected this," Grace said, standing before the largest canvas in the collection. The painting showed a woman's hands working with watercolors. The pigments seemed to flow beyond the confines of traditional representation, becoming abstract expressions of memory and emotion. Fragments of the original portrait were visible within the composition, but integrated so seamlessly that they felt intentional rather than salvaged. River stood beside Violet as they made final adjustments to the lighting. Over the past months, their creative partnership had deepened into something that encompassed every aspect of their lives. He had shown her that restoration was its own form of art, while she had reminded him that some things were meant to be transformed rather than preserved exactly as they were. "Your mother would be proud," River said softly, adjusting the placement of a smaller piece that showed 2 figures working side by side in a studio. Filled with golden light. Violet had painted it from memory, capturing one of their evening sessions. When she had looked up from her easel to find River watching her work with an expression of complete understanding, in that moment she had realized that losing her original portrait had led her to something she never could have planned to love, that celebrated her art rather than merely tolerating it. The opening reception filled Grace's gallery with a warmth that had nothing to do with the winter weather outside. Violet's art teacher colleagues mingled with River's restoration clients. University students chatted with local collectors, and the general energy was one of celebration and discovery. Mrs. Patterson, her former student, stood transfixed before a painting that showed watercolors bleeding and flowing in ways that had once seemed like mistakes but now appeared intentional and beautiful. "You were right," she told Violet. "There really are no mistakes in watercolor, are there? Just unexpected opportunities." Nathan appeared briefly, offering genuine congratulations and a hug that held no awkwardness. Only the recognition of 2 people who had grown in different directions. He spent several minutes studying the paintings, and Violet could see him beginning to understand what she had tried to explain months earlier about the difference between technique and soul. "They're extraordinary," he told her before leaving. "I can see her in all of them, but I can see you too, the you that you've become." As the evening wound down and the last visitors departed, Violet and River found themselves alone in the gallery, surrounded by her work. The paintings seemed to glow in the soft lighting, each one representing not just her artistic growth, but their shared journey from loss to discovery. "I have something for you," River said, producing a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket. "Consider it a collaboration completion gift." Inside was a watercolor brush. But not just any brush, one he had restored from her mother's original art supplies, which Violet had brought to his studio months earlier, along with the damaged portrait. The wooden handle had been carefully refinished, and new bristles had been fitted with the same care he brought to his most precious restoration projects. "I found it in the box with your mother's other brushes," River explained. "It was her favorite for detail work according to the wear patterns. Thought you should have it for whatever you paint next." Violet held the brush with reverence, feeling the weight of history and the promise of future work in her hands. But more than that, she felt the deep understanding that came from being truly seen by another person, not just as an artist, but as someone whose losses and discoveries were worth honoring. "There's something else," River continued, his voice carrying a note of nervousness that was entirely unlike his usual confidence. "I've been thinking about what comes after this exhibition, about partnerships and collaborations and the kind of life we might build together." He reached into his other pocket and produced not a ring, but a small canvas barely larger than a business card, painted with two figures, working side by side in a studio filled with light and possibility. "I know it's not traditional," River said, his words coming faster now, "but I thought instead of a ring, I could offer you this. A painting of our future if you'll have me as a permanent collaborator in both art and life." Violet set down her mother's restored brush and took the tiny canvas in both hands. The painting showed their two easels side by side, their work flowing together in ways that enhanced rather than competed with each other. It was a proposal that understood who she was at the deepest level. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes, absolutely yes." The gallery filled with their laughter, echoing off the walls where Violet's paintings celebrated the truth that sometimes losing what we think we need leads us to discover what we never knew we wanted. 6 months later, Violet and River opened their joint studio in a converted warehouse 3 blocks from Grace's gallery. The space combined art instruction, creation, and restoration, becoming a gathering place for anyone who believed that beauty could emerge from unexpected places. Violet kept her mother's portrait, or what remained of it, in a place of honor in the studio, not as a source of sadness, but as a reminder that endings could become beginnings, that loss could transform into discovery, and that the most meaningful art often emerged from the courage to embrace change rather than simply recreate the past. Their wedding day, held in Grace's garden, with their artisan community surrounding them. Violet carried a bouquet painted with watercolors on silk, a technique River had taught her that allowed the flowers to remain beautiful long after real blooms would have faded. Her wedding dress, simple and elegant, bore tiny embroidered details that incorporated threads salvaged from the fabric that had once protected her mother's portrait. As they exchanged vows under the apple trees, Violet realized that she had found something rarer than the perfect painting. She had found a love that understood that true art, like true partnership, was not about preserving things exactly as they were, but about honoring the past while remaining open to the transformations that made growth possible.